Hello and welcome. You are watching Biz First Review 360. I'm Bernadine Jayasinghe. Now let's take a look at the top stories. Sri Lanka hopeful of a 1.25 billion IMF support program. Exports down 2.5% in January 2016. Land secured for Volkswagen assembly plant. Now for the stories in detail. The central bank is expecting a 3-year IMF support program to conclude in few weeks. The central bank is hoping for an IMF loan of around $1.25 billion with a 3-year support program expected to conclude in a few weeks.
We were looking at something in the region of $1 billion. And what I've continually said is that the quantity really is not the main thing. The main thing is for us to have an agreement with the IMF, because that acts as a catalyst for other agencies like the World Bank, like the ADB, like the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, several bilateral lenders, all to come in and then lend money to the Sri Lankan government and to the private sector. So it's the symbolism of having an agreement with the IMF under the Article 4 consultations is very important. That is the main hurdle. But in terms of how much money they'll give us, maybe $1.25 billion is my expectation. But at the moment, our funding gap for 2016 is somewhere in the region of about $2.5 billion. So if we get 1/3 to a half of that from the IMF, we can easily raise the balance in the markets by issuing international sovereign bonds and other types of instruments like that.
The IMF, releasing a statement, said that the mission made significant progress toward a staff-level agreement with the government on an economic program that could be supported by a 36-month extended fund facility. Central Bank says the rupee was floated with the aim of making exports competitive. The central bank said exports continued on a downward trend, falling 2.5% to $893.9 million in January 2016. While traditional exports like tea, spices and agricultural products plunged, industrial exports like apparel and rubber showed an increase of 0.1%. Central Bank's Economic Research Department said that apparel exports climbed 13% and rubber exports rose 11% in January month, taking total industries exports to $711 million. Imports in January has also dropped by 5.5% to $1,589 million. Vehicle imports were down by 12.6%. Central Bank Governor Arjuna Mahendra expects a pickup in exports from mid this year.
Now we've allowed the currency to float since the 3rd of September last year. And the main reason in doing so was to make our exports more competitive. Before that, Sri Lanka over the last 10 years has seen a contraction in our exports. From 30% of GDP about 15 years ago, our exports are today around 14% of GDP, right? That's been a trend which is adverse, and it has completely flown in the face of trends in our neighboring countries. India, Bangladesh, all these countries have seen an expansion of exports. So we are an outlier. Our country is actually seeing a contraction in exports. One of the fundamental reasons I attribute for that is we maintain an overvalued currency. We depreciated about 9% against the dollar last year, and this year so far it's down about 1%. Now the reason for doing that is to see that traders in the market adjust the rupee to a reasonable level, and then hopefully our exports become more competitive and you will see exports performance picking up. Now that pickup in exports I'm expecting to happen by about the middle of this year. It usually takes 6 to 9 months for that the depreciation of the rupee to have a positive impact on our exports. And also we are expecting this ban on seafood exports to the EU to be lifted around the middle of this year. That will also boost exports. So once we have better export earnings and more dollars flowing to the market, then the central bank can start buying dollars in the market and building up our reserves.
Sri Lanka's trade gap contracted 9.1% in January 2016 to 695 million rupees from $765 million in January 2016 from a year earlier. Volkswagen secures land for assembly plant in Sri Lanka. This is coming after the break. Welcome back. You're watching Biz First Review 360. A land in Kuliapiti has been secured for the $26.5 million Volkswagen assembly plant. The land earmarked for the project will be taken over by the BOI and formally handed over to Sinok Automobile Private Limited for the assembly of cars manufactured by Volkswagen AG, renowned German company, the Board of Investment said in a statement. According to the agreement signed between the BOI and the local agent, vehicles in the 1000cc to 2000cc category, including passenger cars, sport utility vehicles and multi-utility vehicles, will be assembled in Sri Lanka. The brand will be marketed locally for a period of 3 years before exporting to overseas markets. $21.5 million of the total investment will be invested in fixed assets within the next 24 months, the statement said. The BOI says it's keen to attract other leading automobile manufacturers to the island as the industry helps create employment opportunities for local component manufacturers and pave the way for advanced automobile technology to flow in the country. Volkswagen is a leading German automobile manufacturer based in Wolfsburg, Germany. The company was founded in 1937 and manufactures cars, trucks and buses. The company revenue reached Euro 197 billion in 2013. Best known models of the brand are the iconic Beetle, Golf and Passat. Telecommunication and Digital Infrastructure Minister Harim Fernando says a 10% increase in providing quality internet connectivity can boost the country's GDP by 1.2%. Speaking on the Google Loan project, the minister said the prime component of the development of a country is connectivity. He said that quality internet supply will improve connectivity while increasing the productivity of other sectors such as transportation and education in Sri Lanka.
Connectivity කියන්නේ Facebook ලබා දීම නෙමෙයි. ඒක තමයි ජනතාව හිතනවා ඇති මේ කොහොමද රටක් සංවර්ධනය වෙන්නේ connectivity එහෙම නැත්නම් දුරකථන ජාල සම්බන්ධතා ඇති කිරීම එහෙම නැත්නම් data පහසුකම් දුන්නම කොහොමද රටක් දියුණු වෙන්නේ කියලා. එහෙම නෙමෙයි රටක් දියුණු කරන්න අපේ බලාපොරොත්තු. රටක් දියුණු වෙනවා කියන්නේ මේකත් එක්ක බද්ධ වෙච්ච සම්බන්ධ වෙච්ච එකතු වෙච්ච වෙනත් ව්‍යාපෘති රාශියක් ICT එක හරහා අපි මේ වෙනකොට ව්‍යාප්ත කරගෙන යනවා. මේ අවස්ථාවේ අයවැයෙන් වැඩිම මුදලක් වෙන් කළා තියෙන අමාත්‍යාංශය තමයි විදුලි සංදේශ සහ ඩිජිටල් ඇත්තවල පහසුකම් අමාත්‍යාංශය. ජනතාවගේ සියලු කටයුතු දැන් අපි බලන්න අපේ දැන් කොළඹ බැස්සොත් මොනතරම් තදබදයක්. ඒ සියලු දේවල් අඩු වෙනවා මේ අන්තර්ජාල පහසුකම්. කොහොමද ඒක වෙන්නේ? මොබයිල් ෆෝන් එක හරහා තමන්ගේ උපැන්නේ ඉඳන් සියලු දේවල් ගන්න පුළුවන් විදියට මේ වෙබ්සයිට් ඒ හදන්න ඕන දේවල් ඒ සියලු දේවල් ඒ කටයුතු සියලු දේවල් සකස් වෙනවා. ඒ විතරක් නෙමෙයි දරුවන්ගේ අධ්‍යාපනයේ තමන්ගේ අච්චුපොත් වෙනකොට තමන්ගේ සම්පූර්ණ නිල සියලු සවිස්තර දේවල් තමන්ගේ ටැබ්ලට් එකකට ගන්න පුළුවන් විදිහට ඒ කටයුතු වෙනවා. ඉතින් මේවට අන්තර්ජාල පහසුකම් ඕනේ. රටක දල්දේශ නිෂ්පාදනය කොහොමද වැඩි වෙන්නේ? කොහොමද ඒක ප්‍රොඩක්ටිවිටි එක වැඩි වෙන්නේ? රටක ආර්ථිකය කොහොමද ගොඩනැගෙන්නේ නැති වෙන්නේ? ඒ සියලු කරුණුත් එක්ක ඉතින් නිසා ඉන්දියාව ඩිජිටල් කරණය වීම තුළ අද විශාල වශයෙන් දියුණුවක් ලැබලා තියෙනවා. ඉන්දියාවේ විශාල ජනගහනයක් හිටියත් ඒ ඩිජිටල් කරණය හරහා විශාල විනයක් හොඳ ටැක්ස් රෙවෙනියු එකතු කිරීමක් ඒ වගේම ආදායම් බදු හරියට එකතු කිරීමක් ඒ සියලු සංගණනයක් හරියට කිරීමක් සිදු වෙනවා. ඒ නිසා රටක දියුණුවට මේ සියලු දේට මූලික સિદ્ધාන්තය වෙන්නේ connectivity. ඉතින් ලාභයට connectivity තියෙන්න ඕනේ. අඩුවට තියෙන්න ඕනේ. ඒ නිසා විශේෂයෙන්ම දුරකථන ආයතන වලට අපි විශ්වාස කරනවා මේ ක්‍රමය හරහා මෙතුමන්ලට තියෙන විශාල වශයෙන් capex cost එක එහෙම නැත්නම් ඒකට කියන්නේ මූලික වශයෙන්ම තමන්ගේ විශාල මුදල් ප්‍රාග්ධන වියදම් විශාල වශයෙන් විශාල මුදල් යට කිරීමවල වෙනුවට මේ ව්‍යාපෘතිය හරහා එතුමන්ලට සහනයක් ලැබෙයි. ඒ වගේම ජනතාවට අඩු මුදලට data ලබා ගැනීම හැකියාවක් තියෙනවා.
The project, which is joint venture with Rama, a company backed by Sri Lankan-born venture capitalist Chamat Palihapitiya, aims to give service providers access to high internet speeds. Palihapitiya commended the Sri Lankan government on its decision to take on board the Google Loon project.
It was incredible, the reaction in Silicon Valley. And if you think about what's happening in Silicon Valley today, there's all these amazing companies. It's very hard to get attention. And this thing completely captured people's imagination. And the first question that I got was, why did you pick Sri Lanka? And I said, I didn't. They picked us. And they were the ones that were willing to step forward. And that is an incredible testament to the courage and ingenuity of the people here. And you shouldn't lose that. That's what you have to capture. Because that's what makes great entrepreneurs. That's what creates progress. That's what ultimately will give you prosperity. That's a wonderful thing. So give it the benefit of the doubt and actually believe in what's happening. It's really good. There is no ulterior motive.
Minister Harim Fernando said that Sri Lanka will be hosting an international digital summit later this year.
We are planning on a massive digital summit, which Chamath will take the front stage, and he will help us plan the event. We are hoping to have it end of November or beginning of December, and we expect to bring we expect to bring most of the top entrepreneurs from Silicon Valley, because our next drive is to make the digital Sri Lanka, the story of the digital Sri Lanka, to be put out in December or late in November, to say that we are ready to take the revolution of the Sri Lanka the new digitized Sri Lanka.
Views of the central bank governor on the health of the island's economy, that's coming after the break. Welcome back. You're with BizFirst Review 360. Central Bank Governor addressed the media to discuss recent economic developments. Here are some views.
Got some of those papers, and we are requesting further information from our counterparts around the world in terms of central banks as well as other investigative arms of various governments. But I don't want to jump to any conclusions in terms of names and facts that have been mentioned in the media, etc. Because we have to act very responsibly. There are international conventions which cover this type of data, and we don't want to flout any of those. And even our own laws, guarantee privacy to individuals, and unless people are being prosecuted in terms of confirmed evidence in our courts of law, it would be wrong of us to give out any sort of preliminary information that could lead to libelous statements being attributed to central banks. So at this point, all I can say is that we are investigating the material. We are waiting for more material to come. My counterpart, Governor Joe of the PBOC, has given us the authorization to go ahead and issue those bonds in China in renminbi, right? So that part of the clearance has now been obtained. The next stage is we have to issue what are called lead managers. We want to do this very transparently, so we've advertised already for lead managers. There are investment banks in China, both international investment bank as well as Chinese investment banks, who are now negotiating with us to be appointed as lead managers. And then we go through a whole series of due diligence measures where we will have to get a rating by a rating agency in China, in the domestic China renminbi issuance market, as a basis on which we will go for our issuance. So we have to jump through several hoops on a regulatory and fiduciary level before we can actually announce the issuance of those bonds. I reckon it will take about 3 months for us to go through that process. This is very exciting because what it means is that we can now start raising renminbi financing, which is typically much cheaper than US dollar financing in the current market. We can, on my assessment, get renminbi financing at below 5% rates of interest on an annual basis. And if we can use that funding for a lot of these Chinese corporations that are coming to build infrastructure and other projects in Sri Lanka, it'll be cheaper for them, but B, it will also mean that for us as a government, when we have to, say, provide counterpart funding for some of these projects, we can also make use of that lower interest borrowing to fund these projects. So it's a win-win for everyone. Well, like I said, our government borrowing gap this year is about $2.5 billion. We are hoping to secure some of that from the IMF and the World Bank and such like. I would say that perhaps somewhere between $500 million to $1 billion would be a good starting point for this year. But remember, this is a long-term project. We want to go 5, 10, 20 years into the future. by establishing a benchmark Sri Lankan sovereign issuance in the onshore Chinese bond markets. So it's the start of a process, I would view it that way. And FDI is really the Achilles heel of this economy, foreign direct investment. It's been running at about $1 billion a year for the last 5 years, and most of that was into telecoms and into Sri Lankan Airlines. If you remove those two, it was minuscule, almost non-existent. So this is where China and India and all these big countries are so important. If we can get their investors to come into this country and start exporting back to their home markets or even to the international markets, that will be a big change in our economic direction, where we can then raise the export earnings very significantly. And that's really the hope for this country in the future. In Sri Lanka, we are not exporting anymore. We had an import substitution policy under the previous regime. And from my perspective, we can't afford an import substitution policy in this country because we import so much of what we consume. Whether it is vehicles or dal or sugar or, all our basic requirements have to be imported. And to fund that, you have to export. You have to earn dollars. Now, we've been lucky for the last decade. We've got lots of remittances. We've been exporting labor. And that has really saved the nation in the last 10 to 15 years, because the people who work overseas have been remitting larger and larger amounts, which have been growing by about 10 to 15% annually in terms of the dollars they send back to this country. But then last year we saw that those earnings didn't grow at all. They were more or less flat. So far this year, fortunately, and touch wood, in January, February, they have grown again at about 8%. So that's a good sign. People are getting more confident with the new government, and they're sending more money back, and hopefully in the Middle East also oil prices have risen from $20 a barrel to $40 a barrel in the last 2 or 3 months. So a lot of our money comes obviously from the Middle East. Most of our workers live there, and with oil prices rising, they are sending more money back. We all know that. The fact that the government in Sri Lanka doesn't raise enough revenue. It fell to a low of 10.3% of GDP in 2014. Last year, I think it went up to close to 13%, but there again, that was because of the big surge of imports of cars. Vehicle imports, brought in huge duties, but those vehicle imports have now slowed down. So you won't have a repeat of that this year. And you also saw that the Honorable Minister of Finance imposed some one-off taxes on casinos, on liquor manufacturers, and some of the listed companies on their retrospective earnings. So all those are one-off taxes, which again won't be repeated this year. So there is a challenge. We have to raise that 12%, 13% of GDP up to about 15 and eventually 18 to 25% in the medium term. And that's where the real heavy lifting has to take place in Sri Lanka. That's the main policy challenge.
That's all the news we got you tonight. Do join us at next week at the same time. I'm Bernadine Jayasinghe. Good night.